Welcome to the next episode of the Chris Rod Mac Show, where every single week I'm joined by Chris and Rod to talk a little bit about the AI development. As you probably know, in the AI world, every week is like a new year where a lot of things happen. Welcome back, Chris.
Hey guys, good to be back on the show.
Welcome back, Rod.
Hi everyone, it's fantastic to be here every Monday release.
Great. So this week, we're going to talk a little bit about two things. One is Sequoia's latest report on generative AI, and we're going to explore a little bit about what they meant by custom cognitive architecture, and then talk a little bit about the service as a software AI application. Then we're going to dive into State of AI report by Air Street Capital. There are going to be multiple things that we're going to dive into, and without further ado, let's dive in. So, Chris, Rod, this week, the big thing last week was SpaceX's landing reusable of the rocket. That was really, really cool. And I just thought it's worth mentioning because it's something that haven't been done before. And I think with that in vain, with Sequoia, they recently published a new report. I think this is the second year they're publishing it on the generative AI Act Omni. I think in there is a specific thing called, custom cognitive architecture, where you kind of just break down the different types of models into different layers. I think, before we dive straight in, perhaps it would be good to get your thoughts, Rod. What do we mean by custom cognitive architecture? From you as a builder, love to get your thoughts about it. And why is it even important?
Here my argument will be that very often with investors, they try to give a new name to other categories to make it sound sexier. Of course, they are not completely unrelated observers, not influencing the state of the market, but rather they are very active players. And here with Sequoia, what they are calling as cognitive architecture is pretty much what others will call the app layer, meaning to build an AI application, you first need the models, GPT-4, GPT-4o mini, and so on, right? So the ones that we all know. Then likely on top you have other layer of some plumbing, and then it comes the actual application that everyone sees. This can be a CRM, this can be a lead generator, a translator, whatever this is. And in this age of AI, what happened previously was that this last layer, this application layer on top, was often derided as like a thin wrapper. Was said the value is accrued lower down in the stack, in these infrastructure layers, and the top layer is something that is easily replaceable, is something that is a commodity almost. Anyone can implement it, and as a result, doesn't have any defensibility. Now, a little bit like the page is flipping, both in investor world, but also in startups, where in many episodes have discussed how the costs for building AI have completely ballooned. And if you want to do the next GPT model, you need potentially even billions. As a result, an investor, of course, cannot be investing in multiple companies that require billions, and also the companies themselves. So now, what was before considered as non-defensible, not interesting, all of a sudden gets some level of sexiness, and we need to put some name behind it, and it's now cognitive architecture. What they try to mean by that is that the application is specialized on something. So they have this example of, for example, you have a factory with droids, with robots, and each of them is specialized in some task and can do this autonomously. But in any case, it's really just the idea of the value is rather on the application, the CRM, anything that we're using, and likely not lower down in infrastructure, because this infrastructure, it will be rather dominated by NVIDIA, OpenAI, and others. And this is a zero-sum game there.
Great. I think thank you so much for sharing that. I think to your point, Rod, I think what they have in mind is really, the flow of code model interaction to take what input to get certain output, right? It's almost like because of the different stack, like I would say the base model layer, it takes so much money as an investor. How many OpenAI can you bet on? And then I guess there's also another layer where you talk a little bit about the application, the domain specific knowledge that could help to generate domain specific applications to solve real problems. And I think in the article, they talk a little bit about how AI is coming for the services industry rather than just the software industry. And then I think we'd love to get your thoughts around this, I guess, Chris, which is, as a, professional services before, been in professional services before, how do you think about, I guess, service as a software? How should corporate think about their own services within their own businesses and utilizing AI to help to change that? Because it does sound like if you have any sort of domain specific knowledge, you have the ability to create the killer AI application. So we'd love to get your thought, Chris. How should corporate think about this?
Yeah, Max, maybe before we jump into all the details, I feel like for the listeners that have not been able to read the entire essay, maybe we can give a little bit of context. And I think it is also very much inspired by the newest release of OpenAI, their newest model, Coin O1, which is essentially a shift in maybe the logic of how AI or Gen AI actually works. The article talks quite a bit of shifting from a system one to a system two thinking. And I think this is also very much inspired by Kahneman's book, Thinking Fast and Slow, whereby system one is more like a reactive, very intuitive system, and system two is more of a reasoning, more logical kind of system. And so the argument of the article is really around the fact that previously it was really about feeding these AI models with lots and lots and lots of data. And I mean, we also talked about this in our show that at one point of time, you sort of hit an upper bound of all the data you can actually feed a system. And it's really now about inference time. So basically coming up with a certain kind of logic of how to solve a problem. And the whole essay is around how now we're more and more getting to this kind of state of AI technology. And so AI essentially works more and more like a human brain. I think one of the examples that they give is also AlphaGo, which is the system that learned how to play chess. I think there was also another one which learned how to play Go. But the difference to other models is essentially AlphaGo basically just got the rules fed of chess. So, how can a knight move? How does a queen move, etc., and learned by playing against itself and to understand different strategies, very similarly how probably we would also learn as kids, whereby all the other models previously would learn by swallowing databases of grandmaster chess games, and they would like try to replicate patterns that they would see in these databases. So as you can see, it's a very different kind of approach when it comes to learning and when it comes to coming up with sort of the next step in a particular problem. So maybe this just to give a little bit of context. Now, to your question or to the previous idea that also maybe Rod you picked on a little bit, which is okay, you have different layers now, and I think Sequoia does a really good job in sort of trying to simplify things. Basically, you have the infrastructure layer, the hardware, if you want, where NVIDIA is obviously the market monopoly right now, and it's to be seen whether or not NVIDIA is getting disrupted at any point in time. Then you have something called the reasoning layer, which is OpenAI. It's all these different models, Anthropic, Claude, as we have spoken quite a bit around in our show. And then now they come up with this, cognitive layer. And essentially, to Rod's point, it's a very fancy way of talking about this application layer, which we've been talking about for quite a bit of time. And now I think, Max, to your question around service as a software, and by the way, that's obviously a bit of a wordplay because we usually say software as a service. It's now flipped around. And why does this essay do this? It's because now with this very cognitive way of thinking, this different kind of model style, so to speak, more problem solving can be reached and more complex tasks can actually be unlocked. And this is also something we've spoken about when we talked about AI agents. And so now a service that we previously would do with a human could now be done by software. And I think the simplest example of that would be previously you would have someone like a video editor come up, editing a video and kind of like putting together a film. And now you have applications, most likely, like the one that we spoke about last time around Meta or Sora, that are a piece of software that can actually solve the task at hand. And this is basically, obviously, a huge thing and implies quite a bit of new alleys, new competition, new possibilities when we think about it in a business context.
Great, thank you so much for that context, Chris. We're talking about the specific application layer previously, it's really trying to break down and see where does, I guess, a company or a new application fit specifically in that stack from Sequoia's perspective. I think the other thing that comes to mind is that, from an AI application perspective, we have seen some development, but I guess just wanted to get your take. What are some of the specific domain that people are attacking? So we saw a lot of it in the law space. You mentioned a little bit about the video editing space. I just, wonder from both your perspective, what else is out there? There are just a huge amount of things that humans are capable of doing it today. What will get turned into software first? And the reason why that is important is because just thinking from a corporate perspective, they have a lot of stuff going on within their spaces. And what is it that they need to think about? What kind of services they need to start thinking about of tackling with the solution itself? I don't know if both of you have a thought on this. It's just, they have listed out a few things there. So I thought it was quite interesting. So like everything from lawyer, work assistant, software engineer, medical scribe, pen tester to customer support agent. So I'd love to hear, either of your thoughts on this.
I want to take here the perspective of the business model. So where also why they're trying to call this a service as software, where we have spoken about Salesforce in previous episodes and saying how they have started introducing a new pricing methodology where instead of charging per seat per month, as this has been classic for decades in the SaaS space, they are charging for each outcome, meaning every time that their AI recommends a new lead, you will be paying $2. And if you look at how much Salesforce costs today, the starting price is at $25 per seat per month. So this means that already by generating around 12, 13 leads, Salesforce has generated a similar revenue as their starting price. And of course, if we think about any sales process, 10, 12, 13 leads per month is really nothing, it's much more. So here the idea is also relabeling something that in the past others have called usage-based pricing, UBT, where in the end you're paying by the intensity of usage, which also matches with how AI models work, that you have to call them and they have to do some processing and so on, and they generate the answer, and this creates many types of different costs with energy, processing power, and so on and so forth. And as a result, you can have users that are very intensive, few people, but who are using this service very intensively. So this maps nicely, but from a business perspective, this means also as a provider, as a startup, as a company. Now by this, it's possible to charge for many more things that before were already included in the service. So it's also a bit of a disaggregation of services where now, for example, for almost every feature, Salesforce can charge separately, and we will not think, oh, hey, why is like Salesforce now charging for this thing that was before for free or included? But rather think, hey, now I'm getting a full process, and potentially with this, I'm replacing even an employee, because now this process is being completely represented, so executed by the AI.
That's a very interesting point. I think the ability to turn from just doing something to an outcome-based business model kind of just changed the game a little bit. So that perhaps that could be one thing that corporate think a little bit about when they want to develop any sort of AI application, right? Even from a business model perspective, if you're traditionally charging doing something, you kind of just go from a usage base, well, go from a lump sum big software price to a usage-based pricing. I think you could also argue that, which in the article they talk a little bit about task complete. So really based on the outcome that you're trying to drive value from these service as a software mode, if you will.
I think you asked about these killer apps, you asked about business opportunities, and I think I wouldn't even call it usage-based pricing. It's really value-based pricing at the end of the day. Just imagine if you build an AI agent that can help you to generate leads. That lead is actually worth quite a bit, and it becomes a very different kind of ball game in terms of business model, but also in terms of engaging with software companies as a whole. And I think the second thought I had was around this article also very much describes the fact that most engineers actually stop at the point where on the reasoning layer, if we want to stay with that framework, right? They don't want to build out entire user experiences, entire workflows for each and every company, because there are just simply too many customized and very, specific experiences or also requirements each and every company has. So normally it stops at an API level. Therefore, and this is also somehow also how the essay is arguing, there's quite a bit of opportunity for all startups out there, for all the founders out there, to really build for this niche. In a way, it becomes this like long tail. And I think the coolest application they were mentioning was definitely the CRM system, Date.ai, which claims to be a very automated customer tracking and database, whereby whenever you have an action such as an email coming in, the system or the software would actually automatically populate everything. So from moving a deal from one state to another, also not only giving you a notification to answer to a specific lead, but also already generating that answer and apparently also sending it out already. So I think that really is, I would say, next level AI or Gen AI. And obviously this really shows how much more complex you have to when it comes to these type of reasoning tasks or problem solving tasks.
I think that's a very good point, Chris. I think the reasoning layer, because you mentioned thinking fast and slow, the reasoning layer kind of gives it an ability to think a little bit longer. As you think longer, you kind of be able to solve those harder problems longer. So anything to do with logic, it feels like they can think longer and they are able to then eventually generate a response instead of, like the previous LLM, which is more quick and fast responses where it doesn't really solve like the logical problem. I think with that, that is a very good seg into the second part of the show that we want to talk a little bit about, which is the State of AI report from Ann Street Capital. And because in the report, there's so many different things, we're not going to dive into, 200 over pages of them. We're probably going to pick one or two interesting themes that is aligned to what we would just talk about here. Number one, I think we talk, based on the previous segment, we talk a little bit about the different models, the different layers, and eventually you go from foundational LLM, the reasoning layer, and then eventually going into the application layer. So with that, I guess my first question in the report, I'm just going to share my screen really quickly. So in the report, they talk a little bit about, some sort of model convergence. So what do we mean by model convergence? Let me know when you guys can see the screen. So on the, I guess, state of model convergence. So we all know when OpenAI came out, NVIDIA share price shot up. Everyone, got excited about AI. There is a whole host of competitor. Well, when I say whole host, actually not a lot of competitors, but they are competitors. They are trying to build, better models. And we have seen some of that coming in where when it comes to, I will call it performance, there is, more and more convergence into a few models that actually work. OpenAI is still at the top. I just wanted to get, both your thoughts around this, specifically whether or not we will actually get to a place where we will have some sort of model, almost parity, right? It's like one model rules them all in a way. We have seen some industry folks, they are trying to build their own, which we'll come to. But at least for now, for the larger models, we know there is a convergence at the moment. So wanted to get, I guess, maybe start with you, Rod, just to get your thoughts on the latest benchmark and what you think of OpenAI or any sort of models that are coming out near future.
I will try to dissect it in two parts. One is on the technical implications and one is for businesses. On the technical implications, when we talk about rankings, the general idea is being made is that we have these new models and very often they are on par or maybe sometimes even better for some period of time to those provided by OpenAI. But one problem that rankings have, and you can see it anecdotally clearly on social media, Twitter, LinkedIn, and so on, is how their performance varies over time. You can see all the time that people say, oh, has anyone noticed how performance in Claude has gotten so bad, or on GPT, whatever it is, and so on. So although the ranking is done and it might show that Model X is doing so and so, the companies behind are constantly updating it. They're seeing how they can optimize their costs, how they can do it more efficiently, and so on. And this also translates, has downstream effects in the performance of the models. So this is ranking starts only snapshot, while in practice, things are constantly shifting almost on a daily basis. And this also translates on the part of business, where we have had studies that show how OpenAI really dominates the market. So it's something where 3/4 of Fortune 500, they work with OpenAI. We see how even Claude Anthropic, which will be a peer on model performance, it makes only a fraction of model adoption at the enterprise versus, for example, OpenAI. By now, it has become a situation where, let's say, like OpenAI is a little bit like the IBM of this world, and nobody got fired for buying IBM, as the saying goes. Same thing here. Other entrants might, for example, be providing models that are similar in performance, but OpenAI has now the brand, has now the perception, and has also the attention of the executives in large organizations that as a result, what the rankings show will likely have little impact on how buying decisions are made in the enterprise.
That's very interesting. So if I were to get this right, technically you can be a little bit more superior, but because of the cloud that OpenAI has, the adoption is now still with OpenAI. And a lot of larger corporate executives are thinking of it as like an IBM, as you mentioned. Nobody get fired for hiring IBM. That's interesting. And I guess, Chris, from your view, if you speak to larger corporates or even mid-sized corporates, if you have any access to them, are they seeing similar views or similar ideas? Does performance really take into account, or is it more about really just getting the right big solution to test it out first for now?
Max, I don't know. I wouldn't be able to answer your question on that level, but I believe that any technologies normally converge, right? Just simply because also you can re-engineer everything from sort of the best in class, trying to understand how they did it. So I think to me, this is not something that is very much of a surprising insight that at one point we're converging on data, we're converging on model structure. Everyone's sort of like using the same research papers as like a basis, and basic ideas are very similar. So I think at the end, convergence is always what happens when it comes to new technologies, in my opinion.
Cool. I mean, yeah, the whole idea, I guess, initially was to see whether or not they're competitors to OpenAI. That's what, really trying to get to. And it feels like, at the moment, OpenAI, is in the league on its own at the moment.
I will try to draw here a parallel, Max, with the topic of, for example, mobile operating systems, right? We have Android, we have iOS, but has the market share shifted? And by now we're talking when these smartphones start to come out. It was around 2007, 2009. If I'm not mistaken, the market share for Android is above 70% worldwide, and iOS has around 30%. This has not changed. There has been, of course, smaller players that have come and gone, and these two systems, they're pretty much equal in feature parity, right? Sometimes one has better features than the other and so on, but it's pretty much about the same. And there has been almost no changes in so who is where in the market. I can imagine that something like this will be happening or is already happening in the AI space.
Fascinating. Yeah, that's a good point. I never thought of it that way. And if that's the case, it's almost like, we're going to hear OpenAI for a long, long time. And then that's a good seg, Rod. Thank you for bringing up mobile. So there's another, I guess, development in the AI space, which is the models for mobile that are coming up. There are other larger tech companies like Microsoft, Apple. They're developing a little bit models on the I would say mobile suite, if you will. And I guess my sense is, this is going to be interesting simply because now, you and I have access to it on our own mobile. It might turn up as an application for, I don't know, for picture editing, for note typing, etc. But what I would love to see is that whether or not, people could, I guess, create more with, image to text models like Apple is trying to get to on your phone, for example. So I guess wanted to get, both your thoughts around the implications of this, where if model are able to be deployed on mobile, we'll probably have more people creating stuff with it. So I thought that's interesting to me, but love to get both your thoughts. And there will be applications that we use today on the smartphone that will change it slightly, where people will build, I guess, new AI applications, or will just utilize, I guess, more of a default app. Because if I think about it, the reason why Instagram initially started out was, it allows you to have filters. So that kind of helped it to have the first wave. So I'm thinking about if mobile models are being deployed by all these larger corporates, will it, kind of just stifle some of the different ways of doing things, or it will also generate more innovation in that space? So I guess, if either of you have any thoughts on this, it would be pretty cool to get your thoughts.
Honestly speaking, I don't find it, again, very insightful in the sense that, isn't it like, I mean, it's a prerequisite, right? Most of our days nowadays is spent on the mobile phone. I think much more so than on laptops, other than during work time. And even in countries such as China, the main device is not a laptop, but actually a phone, a smartphone. So eventually this needs to happen. I'm surprised that there's even like mobile version, I guess is how I would put it, for running Gen AI on the phone. I don't know. I mean, I have ChatGPT also on my phone, and it works. But of course, there's efficiency to be gained by thinking through solutions for a mobile phone. But to me, this is like something that is unavoidable to make it work on a mobile phone, whether you design a new tailored version for mobile, or if you can like somehow squeeze in the existing models into a phone.
I kind of see it the other way simply because there's still a lot of the world that's not entirely connected. So in my head is that if there's an ability to kind of open up LLMs to the edge cases, I'm thinking about, I don't know, rural Indonesia, I suppose, or rural Africa, where you have the ability to kind of let other folks to play with the, I guess, high performing LLMs, if you will. That's just one way to think about it. Number one. Number two, until now, we've been talking about, AI is really rich person's game, at least on the foundational layer perspective. Now, even if you want to build something on top of it, OpenAI is not particularly cheap. So or the larger models where you have to continuously ping and have the ability to compute them. So that's why for me, what's interesting is the pulling down on the cost of using LLM, but on specific models might be able to run on edge cases.
I have two thoughts here, so to connect both of your ideas and also to connect to our concept of service as software. So where first, service as software. With this integration in mobile, what we will also start seeing, and it's happening now, is how we don't think anymore about models, but about features, about outcomes. Where if you look at the latest features for iOS, for Android, and so on, they're not really talking about, now so Google Android has this powerful LLM, whatever it is. No, they're saying, now you're able to, for example, remove someone from a photo. The classic example of someone photobombs your selfie or whatever you're taking. And this becomes impossible later to take out. But now you just click, just point with your finger, and then this person is removed and you have a perfect picture. Or just the fact that already for some time, it has been possible to just copy paste any text from a photo, even something that was not meant as being like a document, street signs, anything that appears on the picture. And these are things that the end user is not really thinking, hey, behind there is some AI and so on. They just think, hey, this is just a feature. And now I'm able to remove, just as you were saying, Max, filters in Instagram. This is happening. And the other topic is on this democratization and what you were saying about rural Indonesia and so on. I was, like a couple of weeks ago at a hackathon organized by A16Z and Mistral. And I was asking the organizers what surprised them the most. They told me that what was the most surprising for them was that one of their participants, who on top was doing really great things, was someone who is 13 years old. And so you can see also how AI, be on a phone or in a computer, is enabling that pretty much almost children, they can do applications that are on a level that is competitive for international hackathons.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's the democratization of the LLM. To me, it's really interesting. It's like democratization of knowledge, right? This kind of just gives you the compound ability to build value on top because, people kind of just think differently. And of which, talking about application and use cases, we obviously talk a little bit about, RPAs previously. And then we have seen talk a little bit about specific AI application. And then I would say in the past couple of weeks, JP Morgan came out with a financial workflow AI solution. So what I'm going to do, I'm just going to jump straight to the page. And then, it's quite a quite interesting for me simply because previously we spoke to, I believe the founder of Automated. They're able to utilize AI to help you to cover some of the downfall of RPAs or traditional RPAs that haven't been able to help you to do that. And the reason why I asked about use cases previously on the corporate side is, try to find, I would say, interesting outcomes that large corporates are trying to get to. And here we have one example, which is, JPMC building an executable workflow for financial services. And it's really targeting at addressing some of the automation problem that they had using RPA. So for both of you, this is something I guess is interesting for me, and wanted to get your thoughts around the multimodal demonstration about how I would say corporates can think about taking RPA use cases to try to push it onto an AI-led solution. And it's more really trying to, I guess, share the different workflows and trying to get AI to make it a little bit more relevant for the business.
This is also tightly connected to what we were saying about, so here's state, so service as software, where we're talking about workflows. We're not talking about, let's say, just specific features. We're not talking about just specific models and so on, but we're thinking about outcomes. And outcomes is always a result of a process, of a workflow. Similar here. But at the same time, I will try to make a differentiation. And then when we're talking about, for example, here, JP Morgan, even though it's a bank, and we'll say, hey, financial institutions, maybe not much innovation is happening there. Maybe they're a little bit more laggards compared to tech companies. JP Morgan is a little bit more like the exception. So where they have in a dedicated AI team now for many years, where their head is Manuela Veloso. So she's one of the leading names, one of the leading professors now for a few decades. The type of innovation that they have been doing for quite a while is quite remarkable. And so sure, they are able to present things, are able to innovate internally, but that doesn't mean that in the end others are in a similar position. But we see here this pattern of how can we use these type of systems that enable to autocomplete tasks, that enable to fill in the gaps without having too much context, and therefore glue things that before required hard-coded rules. We're seeing how in the end we can connect these different modules, different set of tasks and so on, and go all the way to complete workflows, complete, let's say, like day-to-day activities, and starting to become something where potentially this can replace employees.
I just wanted to know, as someone who works for a bank, what would it mean? How would it look like to use FlowMind, and how would it automate financial workflows? Maybe you can give an example of this robotic process automation we're talking about.
Yeah, absolutely. I think there are many, many examples within the banks, within the banking industry. I think maybe let's start off with one that recently came to mind. Let's say equity research. So traditionally, you have an equity analyst who truly understands a single industry, sometimes a single business, and they're able to then break down all the specifics about that business according to whatever the market is happening, and also try to then compare them to the competitors, as well as, when I say market, as in the wider market implications. So those are, I would say, different things that a equity analyst will look at, and then tie that to specific financial models to try to reflect if certain thing happen in the world, what would it do to the financial returns, and then ultimately come to almost like a probability distribution of what the share price would be. So someone will have to write those workflow, and it goes from researching, understanding all the different contexts that you already had, understanding where and what is being said right now, and then trying to publish that and then make some sort of prediction based on those information. So that is just one workflow, right? Just to generate the right report. And a lot of, I would say, larger banks and investment banks, they tend to send that out quite a lot. And this is just a client-facing process. And then if you take the same idea to, let's say, investment bank, when they go and pitch for a deal specifically, the process is pretty much not 100% the same, but there are similarities, right? You still have to understand what's the valuation. You still have to understand what the market is. What does the business do? Who are the competitors? Like all these specific workflows, it feels like it can and will be replaced by AI, or if not, get completed 50% by AI. And then someone can go in and spend the nights to fix the logos and stuff like that. Hence why I think the automation part of it is super interesting. And coming from a large corporate is also very interesting because they have the specific knowledge that they have. I'm just trying to think if it's a startup that is trying to compete in these areas, like how do they gather those domain specific knowledge and to try to solve the problem? And I don't know about other industry, but I know there are like within financial services, if you're very deep in capital market stack, the people who come out and build stuff more often than not are people who have some knowledge about that space first. Else, you don't even know if you're looking at that problem specifically. That's just something that come to mind.
Max, to underscore your point, I was at a financial services conference recently. One of the speakers was from Elliott Investment Management. And the person was saying that all these financial, especially for wealth management and so on, they're pretty much like content creators, media companies, where if you think about how it was in the 90s and earlier, they will create glossy magazines with investment ideas, research reports, and so on. And this is very bespoke because, of course, their customers, they want novel ideas where they believe they were only prepared for them. That is, they're specifically targeting their unique needs. And all of this can be pretty much done end to end by any type of AI system, going from, as you were saying, so here, the equity research and so on, to the preparation of the report with tables, charts, graphics, and so on, the generation of the file for print, and the print itself. So in all this is pretty much zero human involvement in all this. There is no more like human in the loop, so to say, but it's more end to end from saying, I need for my high value client Max, so he's a high net worth individual, I need these ideas, 1, 2, 3. Please prepare the glossy magazine report that will be sent to his address in this location.
Yeah, I think the entire process will need definitely be handled soon. Especially, I think there are quite a lot of things within middle and back office. It's not just within financial services, right? Like operationally, there are just a lot of things that still require humans to be in the loop to try to do it. And I felt that with an AI upgrade, if you will, it kind of just changed that game a little bit. Great. I think there's another interesting stuff that we are going to move on to right now. So on page 91. So to me, this is quite interesting to look at. So what is this is basically the number of large-scale NVIDIA GPUs clusters with the different companies that have them. What caught my eye initially was XDX market. So if for those who don't know, because obviously I'm in financial services, XDX market is one of the largest market maker in the world on foreign exchange. I was quite surprised to see them actually own such a huge chunk of NVIDIA GPUs. And funnily, I don't see other competitors of theirs on it. I don't know why, and maybe it's just they haven't been able to capture it. So for me, that was quite interesting. The other one that came to mind was obviously DeepSeek, which is where a lot of the, I would say, model in China is built as well. So I just thought this is quite interesting on where the A100 clusters are. And I believe NVIDIA is also working on the second model, H200. Please correct me if I'm wrong. That's currently being developed. So we'll see who owns that amount of clusters as well. But I think, looking at this, I'm not super surprised that, Meta, Tesla, some of the biggest owners of GPUs. But if you guys have any thoughts, I thought it was interesting.
It's so fascinating when you realize which companies own which set of technologies. And as you're saying, Max, so there are always the surprises of unexpectedly a company where technology is non-core, all of a sudden it turns out that they have this massive automation, this state-of-the-art infrastructure. Yes, it's fascinating. But also looking at this specific graph, we should also remember how we were discussing earlier this year that there are bottlenecks in the production of GPUs, there are bottlenecks in the production of hardware, all the way dating back to pandemic problems with supply chain and so on, but also just the demand. When I talk with people, so from NVIDIA, from other large manufacturers, they tell me that there are waiting lists, and this waiting list to get these type of clusters go all the way to maybe 18, 24 months that you have to be there before you can be in a position of getting your cluster delivered to you. So this is not surprising that the set of players has more or less remained stale or stable, just because it just takes too long for this type of architecture, this type of hardware to be delivered to the companies.
When I look at this graph, I'm a bit surprised to see Meta on it, but not the other competitors that are in the modeling space. So what about OpenAI? What about, I suppose, Anthropic and Google?
Well, in the case of OpenAI, they part of like the investment that they have from Microsoft is pretty much credits that they use to leverage the Microsoft infrastructure, their data centers with Azure, so training models. And Anthropic has a similar deal with AWS. So I can imagine that that's why this is not included, because likely this means who
They don't
has
technically own it. Yeah.
yeah, so who has these GPU cards in some basement, whereas so these companies, they are rather renting them from providers.
I think as for
Makes sense.
Google, they kind of looking to build their own as well, right, Chris? I think the TPU that they have been trying to build. In fact, I think Meta is also trying to build their own chip as well, just to, if not to replace NVIDIA, but at least compete with NVIDIA to try to reduce their cost a little bit. It's just fascinating on where the world's GPU who are contributing to the massive uplift in valuation for NVIDIA. Not just them, but also the AWSs of the world, the Microsoft of the world. Next thing that I wanted to, I guess we talked a little bit about this before, which is, massive revenue multiple. And I just wanted to show, based on, there was a little graph that actually shows up, and I find it very, very, very amazing on the revenue multiple, right? So OpenAI, obviously, if you think about it, they are almost like the gods of AI at the moment. But it's surprising to see that you have also other layers or other companies that are being paid massive multiple for what they are. I just personally looking at it, I guess more from a financial lens, it makes me squirm a little bit. It's like, okay, now that you have to live up to that height, right? Will we be able to get there? That's, I guess, just something that I'm thinking about. I don't know about both of you on your views around this. I know OpenAI has been growing quite quickly, right? We talked about it previously around how their revenue actually meeting that, but their losses are also growing in a way. If we talk a little bit about like technology eventually converge and OpenAI is still at the top, then I can see them eventually making up to that multiple. But the other players, it just makes me, I guess, a little bit scared, I suppose.
Here, my take will be that we have to think this is systemic. So where the compensation rates for technologists in this space, especially in the US, they are 500,000 and beyond. And large part of this compensation package, any type of options, equity, participation in the company, and so on, these companies need to raise at very high valuations to be in a position of continue giving their employees this type of participation into the company, and also to set, given that this is correlated to the valuation itself, then it makes sense. So the higher the valuation, then the more participation they can give, and also they can tell the employee, oh, actually what you're getting is worth X and Y, but in the end, it's all paper values. Just last week, we had in our episode this discussion about, so how was that? This healthcare AI startup, Hippocratic, if I'm not mistaken with the name, where it's Series A and is valued at 500 million, right? So we're seeing this attachment between what we knew from SaaS companies, classic enterprise software, and so on, and companies where you need AI at its core, and as a result, you need to bring a very rare set of skills which command a very high premium, and this leads to these crazy valuations.
I think I would break it down differently. I mean, the mentioned companies are very different, right? Like Anthropic, OpenAI, Perplexity are all chatbots, models. You could argue that maybe Anthropic and OpenAI are somewhat more similar, while Perplexity tries to be the next generation Wikipedia. And you could argue maybe just from like looking at the different multiples that Perplexity might be a bit more expensive compared to the other two that are more like the benchmark. Runway, as far as I Googled, is a video creation platform, which runs at 90x. I can't say much more about it. I think Cohere is interesting. I remember Cohere is like an enterprise AI layer. So basically they try to solve for enterprise, knowledge management, etc. And I think their sweet spot is really to try to A, integrate into an enterprise, and B, also to provide the security layers that are necessary to actually work in an enterprise environment. So I do see that there's potential growth here in terms of, okay, how many enterprises could adapt here or adopt the software and make something out of the capability here. Stability is a text to image generator, which I suppose could also have some growth path when it comes to thinking about everything in the creative space. But what I found most surprising is definitely character.ai, which is essentially chatbots that have personalities, right? So basically, if you wanted to chat with Albert Einstein, then you can find that kind of persona on that platform. And the reason this really struck at me is because it's so much more hyped than the others, but also this one is clearly a B2C kind of focus, right? It's really like targeting the users, the end users. So I'm very surprised to see that. I would have imagined that Cohere probably holds more market potential than a character.ai. And then you have these utility tools such as Runway on video and Stability maybe on image generation that if you played smart, you probably can create a bigger market. But yeah, I'm just very surprised about character.ai. Also, compared to the chat foundational models like OpenAI, etc., it's like a completely different league, right?
You're totally right, Chris. I was thinking, and now you're mentioning that indeed, character AI is what we were discussing earlier in the Sequoia piece on a thin wrapper for an AI model. So be like exactly like this perfect example of what is a thin wrapper, something like a character AI, where there is no model behind. It's just giving personas that you can chat with. You can chat, have like a digital girlfriend, or maybe chat with Sherlock Holmes, whatever you want. You're saying. So where is here really like this defensibilities mode? And also it seems very intuitive that, for example, something like Meta with WhatsApp, they start integrating this, that in your list of contacts, you have here Sherlock Holmes. And then you say, hey, now I want to text Sherlock Holmes. And I start messaging Sherlock Holmes, which will be pretty much the value proposition of character AI. Stability is also very interesting software. It has been mired by controversy and departures and a lot of drama in that organization. So it's pretty much a company whose core was to support research groups that were really pioneers in the development of text-to-image models, and then enable them, give them a lot of resources. But Stability didn't have really itself any type of like development. And then there was some problems with how they were reporting some numbers and so on that led to the departure of the CEO. And now I do not know if this multiple reflects the current situation of the company, because they have lost their CEO, there were many departures, layoffs, and so on and so forth. But yeah, so it has been maybe a case of a really good CEO at selling their company, maybe more so than what the company has to offer.
Perfect. And with that, thank you very much both for your input on this. I like the breakdown of it and also taking it from talent attraction perspective. I think just to wrap up really quickly, one thing that I think might support the revenue multiple, it's on this page, which is AI first challenger tend to scale revenue much, much quicker than their SaaS peers. And I thought, again, it's just interesting to see, again, trying to understand the dynamic of the market. I guess with that, thank you so much, everyone, for tuning in. Today, we spent a little bit of time talking about Sequoia's generative AI paper, where they exposed the idea of custom cognitive architecture, really trying to get to the application layer of service as a software, really inspired by OpenAI's time to inference, as Chris mentioned. And then secondly, we spend a little bit of time on State of AI report, talking about model convergence, which is a common theme, but that also plays into some of the GPU's direction. What are the massive revenue multiple, and what are the possible use cases from the development of AI? And with that, thank you so much again for joining us today. It was always fun to do this. If you have any feedback, any thoughts, please let us know. We enjoy doing this, and thank you so much.
Thank you, guys.